The ship drifted through the silent void, the crew suspended in their individual cryopods. All was still except for the occasional flicker of warning lights on the ship's control panels. Captain Liora had programmed the vessel to wake the crew when they were within a day of landing on Vesper 9, a planet rumored to be humanity's next habitable outpost. However, things were not proceeding according to plan. The system had malfunctioned, and a strange pulse unmapped and unknown had triggered something deep in the heart of the ship. Without warning, the cryopod containing Commander Kael began to thaw. The hiss of escaping gas filled the room, and Kael's eyes fluttered open. He wasn't supposed to be awake. His muscles ached as he pulled himself out, lungs burning with the chill of cryo-sleep. The ship's AI, Onyx, was oddly silent. Kael's instincts, honed through years of space travel, screamed that something was wrong. He stumbled toward the control deck, but every step felt heavier than it should. The ship's gravity calibration was fluctuating. Kael gripped the walls for support as he moved. When he reached the control center, he was greeted by a sight that made his blood run cold. The ship's navigational systems were in chaos. The autopilot had disengaged, and a strange signal pulsed through the radar. It wasn't just interference. It was structured, deliberate, like a beacon calling out in deep space. Kael tried to access Onyx's command functions, but the AI wouldn't respond. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He tapped in a manual override, and after a tense minute, the AI's voice returned. "Commander Kael. You have awoken prematurely. There is an unidentified signal originating from the nearby system." "Why didn't you wake Liora?" Kael's voice was rough, but sharp. "I attempted to. The cryopod protocols failed. There is a new presence on board," Onyx replied, sounding uncharacteristically uncertain. Kael's breath hitched. "What do you mean presence?" The ship's sensors detected movement in the lower cargo bay. "It is not registered as part of the crew or equipment manifest." Kael's mind raced. Had something boarded their vessel during cryo? Impossible, unless he shook the thought away. He had to investigate. Before waking the others, he needed to ensure they weren't in imminent danger. He armed himself with a plasma cutter, rudimentary but effective, and made his way to the cargo bay. Every step down the dimly lit corridor was agonizingly slow. The pulse of the ship's emergency lighting gave everything an eerie, strobe-like effect. As he neared the entrance to the cargo hold, a sound froze him in place. It was faint, a low humming vibration. Organic, but not quite. It felt alive. Kael pressed the door's manual release. It groaned open, revealing a cavernous bay bathed in darkness. The hum grew louder. He stepped in, scanning the room with his cutter's light. Crates and equipment were neatly stacked, just as they had been before the crew entered cryo. But in the far corner of the bay, a sphere hovered several feet above the floor. It was metallic yet pulsated with an inner light, as if something inside was trying to break free. Strange glyphs none Kael could recognize spiraled along its surface. The sphere thrummed with the same rhythm as the mysterious signal. Kael approached cautiously. The air around it felt denser, charged with static. "Onyx, what is this?" Kael asked, keeping his voice steady. The AI hesitated before responding. "Analyzing. Origin unknown. Energy readings are off the charts." Kael extended the cutter, but before he could take another step, the sphere reacted. Its surface rippled, and a tendril of light shot out, connecting with Kael's wrist. He dropped to his knees as a flood of images overwhelmed him. Cities with spires that pierced the clouds, endless oceans filled with bioluminescent creatures, and a sky that burned with twin suns. He saw civilizations rise and fall, wars waged across stars, and then nothingness. A vast void that swallowed everything whole. The visions stopped as abruptly as they began. Kael gasped for air, his heart pounding. He was no longer in the cargo bay. Or rather, he was and wasn't he. The space around him had shifted. He stood in a version of the bay overlaid with shimmering, semi-transparent images. It was as if two realities were colliding. A figure emerged from the shimmering distortion. Tall, humanoid, but with elongated limbs and eyes that glowed like the sphere itself. Its presence radiated both intelligence and ancient wisdom. "You were chosen," it said, though its mouth didn't move. The voice echoed directly in Kael's mind. Chosen for what? Kael managed to ask, his body still trembling. For the awakening. Before Kael could demand more, a blaring alarm pulled him back to reality. The shimmering vision disappeared, and the sphere now floated dormant once again. Kael staggered to his feet. The entire ship was shaking. Onyx's voice broke through the chaos. "Commander Kael, multiple unidentified vessels are approaching at high velocity. I suggest immediate evacuation. Wake the crew." Kael barked. "I am unable to comply. The cryopod systems remain offline." Kael cursed under his breath. He sprinted back toward the crew quarters. His mind reeled from the encounter, but there was no time to process. They were sitting ducks if they stayed here. He reached Captain Liora's pod and began the manual thawing process. It was slow, agonizingly so. As the pod's locks hissed open, Liora's eyes snapped open. Her confusion was short-lived as Kael hauled her out and explained everything in rapid-fire bursts. "We need to abandon ship," he finished. Liora's gaze hardened. "No. We're not running. We're outnumbered," Kael argued. "And I think that sphere triggered all of this. They're coming for it." "Then we don't let them have it," Liora said, determination burning in her eyes. She turned to Onyx's control panel. "Activate all defensive systems." Before Onyx could respond, the ship shuddered violently. The outer hull had been breached. Kael and Liora exchanged a grim glance. Time had run out. Something or someone had boarded. Kael and Liora bolted down the corridor, the distant echo of metallic footsteps chasing them. The intruders had breached the hull, but no alarms blared. Onyx's voice, typically calm and measured, crackled with static before cutting out completely. They were cut off from the ship's AI, leaving them with only their instincts and each other. They reached the armory near the control deck. Kael slammed his fist on the emergency override, and the reinforced doors slid open. Inside, the sparse weapons inventory glinted under the dim emergency lights. Liora grabbed a shock rifle, while Kael strapped himself with a plasma blaster and grenades. Their breath was ragged, but their minds were sharp. "We need to secure the sphere," Liora said, breaking the silence. "Whatever this is, it's central to why they're here." Kael nodded, but doubt tugged at him. "Are we sure we want to protect it? It didn't feel friendly." Liora's eyes narrowed. "We don't know enough to decide yet. What we do know is that these intruders came for it. We can't let them have it." They moved back into the corridors, each step deliberate. Kael's mind raced. The visions from the sphere had shown him destruction on an unimaginable scale. He couldn't shake the feeling that the thing was a harbinger of something far worse than just an alien boarding party. As they approached the cargo bay, a low hum began to vibrate through the walls. The air felt thick with tension, and Kael's skin prickled. Liora held up a fist, signaling him to stop. They peered around the corner. 4 figures stood in front of the sphere. They weren't fully solid, more like holograms, but with a strange, unstable physicality. Their elongated forms flickered and shifted, as if reality itself was struggling to contain them. Their eyes glowed with the same otherworldly light Kael had seen in his vision. The largest figure extended a hand toward the sphere, and the glyphs along its surface began to shift and glow more intensely. Liora raised her rifle, but Kael grabbed her wrist before she could fire. "Wait." She shot him a furious look, but he nodded toward the scene unfolding in front of them. The sphere had begun to change. Its smooth surface cracked open along invisible seams, and a pulsing, white energy poured out in ribbons that swirled through the air. The figures stepped back as the energy began to take shape. It solidified into a humanoid form, but its features were indistinct, fluid and constantly shifting. Its presence radiated raw power. The lead intruder spoke, its voice reverberating unnaturally. "The vessel has awakened." The humanoid figure made of energy didn't respond. Instead, its glowing eyes fixed on Kael and Liora, as if it had known they were there the entire time. Its gaze pierced Kael, and a familiar voice echoed in his mind. "You are the key." Kael's knees nearly buckled under the weight of the mental intrusion. The words weren't a command, they were a truth, immutable and ancient. He didn't know why or how, but he felt it in his bones. Liora, unaware of the mental exchange, shifted her stance and took aim again. "I'm giving you one chance to back away from the sphere." The lead figure turned to her, its form crackling with dark energy. "You do not understand what you protect. Step aside, or be unmade." Kael's mind raced. He couldn't let this escalate into open combat, not yet. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. The figure hesitated, its glowing eyes narrowing. "We are here to prevent what is to come. The vessel, this sphere, is a catalyst. If it is allowed to activate fully, it will tear open the barriers between worlds. Chaos will reign." Kael's pulse quickened. "And what's your solution? Destroy it?" "No," the figure said. "Take it back to its origin. It must be returned to its home, or everything you know will perish." Liora didn't lower her weapon. "You're asking us to trust the word of intruders who just breached our ship?" "We did not come to destroy," the figure said. "We came to stop destruction." Kael's mind flashed back to the visions, the rise and fall of civilizations, the consuming void. He didn't know if the intruders were telling the truth, but one thing was clear: the sphere was far more dangerous than any of them had realized. Before Kael could respond, the ship shuddered violently. Sparks rained down from the ceiling, and warning lights flashed. Onyx's voice returned, distorted but urgent. "The ship is being pulled into a gravitational anomaly. Collision imminent." Liora cursed. "They've disabled our navigation." "No," the lead figure corrected. "It's the sphere. Its activation is destabilizing space-time." The energy humanoid in the center pulsed brighter, as if feeding off the chaos. Kael felt the weight of its gaze again. "You must choose," it said. "Leave me, and I will consume this ship and all within it. Or take me to where I belong." Kael made his decision. He lowered his weapon and stepped toward the sphere. "Kael!" Liora barked. "What are you doing?" "I'm ending this," he said, turning to face her. "Whatever this thing is, it's not meant to stay here. We have to take it back." Liora's jaw clenched. "And what if it's a trap?" Kael didn't have an answer, but the sphere's energy was growing more unstable by the second. They didn't have time to argue. Reluctantly, Liora lowered her rifle. "Fine. But if this goes sideways, we're destroying it?" Kael nodded. He turned to the intruders. "Help us stabilize the ship. We'll get it out of here." The lead figure's eyes glowed brighter. "Very well." The intruders moved with swift precision. One of them extended its hands toward the sphere, emitting a field of stabilizing energy. The ship's violent shudders began to lessen. Kael and Liora rushed to the control deck, where Onyx's interface was flickering erratically. "Onyx, plot a course to the coordinates they provide," Kael commanded. Onyx hesitated for a moment before responding. "Course set. Departure in 60 seconds." The sphere pulsed one last time, and its energy form began to dissolve, merging back into the sphere itself. The glyphs along its surface glowed brighter, forming a single unified pattern. The lead figure looked at Kael one final time. "Your journey is only beginning." With that, the figures vanished, their forms dissipating into the air like smoke. The ship's engines roared to life, and Kael felt the familiar pull of acceleration. As the ship broke free from the anomaly, the sphere remained dormant, but Kael knew its awakening had only just begun. He and Liora exchanged a tense look. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: whatever lay ahead, they would face it together.